My name is Buck Wilkerson.
But your original name is Ralph.
My original name was Ralph M. Wilkerson.
And could you spell Wilkerson?
Wilkerson.
What is your birthday?
June 24, 1932.
So you are now 80...
I'm now 88.
88. You look great, sir.
Yeah, I feel like I'm 98.
And you born the day before the day that Korean War broke out, June 24th.
That broke out the day after my birthday.
Yeah. Oh boy. So you are born to be a Korean War veteran.
Yeah, I guess so.
Where were you born?
I was born on a cattle ranch in Wyoming.
Can you spell it?
No, I was born in Lovell, Wyoming. My dad was a cattle rancher.
Uh-huh. And tell me, so your father was rancher.
Yeah.
How many siblings did you have at the time?
I had 8 siblings.
Wow. And where were you located? You are the eldest or youngest?
I'm next to the youngest.
Next to the youngest. How is it like to live with another 7 siblings?
I thought it was kind of rough then, but it was really wonderful. All but 3 of them are gone now.
So your oldest brother or sister must be like a mother or father figure.
Well, I had all of them were mothers and fathers to me. We were a big family. We always had additional kids from relatives living with us. But I still have one sister alive at 96, another sister at 93, and a brother at 94. All still living.
So did you grow up there, and did you finish your school here?
I went to high school there. I graduated high school down there in Lovell.
What is the name of it?
Lovell High School. Lovell.
High school. When did you graduate?
1950.
So you graduated in the year that the Korean War broke out?
I graduated in time to go to Korea, yeah.
You born day before the date that the Korean War broke out, and
Yep.
then you graduate so that you could go to the Korean War in 1950.
I guess so.
Did you know anything about Korea when you graduated?
I only knew that it existed. I'd always known it as chosen. And I knew very little about it at all.
Very little.
Very little.
You didn't know where it locates.
Oh, I did know that. Yeah, I was always good at geography, and I did know where it was.
And so, how did you come to know about the breakout of the Korean War? Was it newspaper or radio, or what was it?
It was on the radio.
Radio.
Yep.
And what were you thinking? You thinking you are going to go to war?
Well, I knew I was going to go because in 1948, 2 years earlier, I had joined the National Guard.
When?
In 1948. I joined a National Guard unit here in Cody, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And I knew that they were going to be called up.
So were you drafted or joined?
I went, when they called the unit to active duty, I went with them. And that was in June. They called them up immediately, and I went in the service then. And I didn't know at the time I was going to be there another 25 years, but I was.
Were you afraid that you are dragged into the war?
Not really. I was kind of interested in it, curious as to what it was going to be like. My brothers had all been in the war, in the Second World War, and I wondered how I would act in wartime. And I was kind of anxious to find out.
You're an idiot.
I know it. That's what I found out.
You were curious to the war.
Well,
you could have been killed.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But you were too young.
Well, I learned a lot. And I got older real fast.
Like what? What did you learn from the war?
Well, I found that that there's somebody on the right and somebody on the left of you that are interested in keeping you alive too.
Yeah.
And you got the same obligation to them.
Mm.
And I I grew up literally. I changed from a young boy to a man in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
I found out a lot of things that I had not been exposed to because I'd lived on a ranch in Wyoming where all I ever saw was the rear end of a cow, and got exposed to the world.
So where did you get any basic military training at all?
Yeah, I went. Of course, we trained in the National Guard, but it was minimal training. I thought it was training, but I found out it was just attendance,
Yeah.
more than anything. But we went to Fort Lewis, Washington, and took basic training there.
Yeah.
And we went out there in August and trained there till December.
Did you hear anything about the Korean War news from there?
Oh yeah, yeah. There were some people that had been and had come back already.
Oh, what do they tell?
Some people who were there was a very big hospital, Madigan Hospital, and there were people there, and I talked to some who had been there, and they scared the dickens out of me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always curious as to what it was going to be like. And we got on the boat, went down to California, picked up some people, went to Alaska and picked up some more, and then took off and landed in Busan.
When was it? When did you leave from California?
We left California in late December. I can't remember the date.
Uh-huh.
But we were on that boat for a month
Yep.
because we had to go pick up another unit down in California.
Yeah.
We sailed out from Seattle, and we went to California, picked up a unit, and turned around, went back to Whittier, Alaska, and picked up another unit. And then we went to Yokohama and offloaded some of them, and the rest of us stayed on until we went to Busan. And we got to Busan, and it was miserable, muddy, rainy mess, and the war was right at Naktong River then.
Ah. No. When did you arrive in Korea?
In January, first week of January.
1951.
Yes.
So there was still war going around in Naktong area?
Oh yeah, yeah. Naktong River, out across the river, they were still fighting. There were mainly guerrilla operations.
Right, right.
But they'd already been fighting up the highway trying to open the road to Daegu,
Yeah.
and we had mainly security for ourselves there. But we had some activity that was caused by guerrilla operations from.
So most of the North Koreans withdrew because of the Incheon landing in September 15th, 1950. But there are remnants of North Korean soldiers as guerrilla forces.
That's right.
How dangerous was it at the time? Were you in the front line dealing with the guerrillas, or what?
We were that. But as far as dangerous, I had never had a sense of being in danger.
Uh-huh.
I've always been very confident of taking care of myself.
Yep.
And again, I was kind of considered to be a gung-ho soldier, and we did whatever we had to do to maintain our security. And finally the guerrillas were running out of food and ammunition, and would try to sneak into our bases, not to fight, but to steal food and clothing and ammunition and weapons if they could. And our duty there until until about, we were there about a month. And then we got on the train and went to Daegu.
So, what was your unit at the time?
My unit was the 300th Armored Field Artillery.
300th
Armored Field Artillery. We had 105 howitzers mounted on M7 tanks, on the Sherman tank chassis, but we had howitzers.
Does that belong to what division was it?
We were unassigned because we were one of a kind, and they moved us a lot from unit to unit.
So 8th Army.
We were actually 10th Corps is what we ended up being in.
Oh. So 300th Armored Field Artillery.
Yes.
And what was your specialty?
My specialty was a driver and gunner.
What was your rank?
My rank when I went over there was a private. When I came home, it was a staff sergeant.
Whoa. So you went up to Daegu, and how was the situation there? That's where I went to school, and my father was also Air Force general.
Okay, well,
He was in charge of Daegu area.
well, we were actually fighting there then, and Daegu, then from there to Wonju. You know, it's been a long time. It's kind of hard to remember, but I remember some of the names. And Wonju at that time was the end of the railroad. And there was Yangu Valley area. And I don't remember many of the other names. We were primarily used as the first echelon of artillery, because we were mobile and we could fire direct and pull back and continue to fire. And a stationary piece, they have to pick them up, hook them up, pull them off, set them up someplace else. But we could move and set up in very, very short time. And we were on several times. We were positioned right on the front line because we had, depending upon the position, because we could fire what they called grape shot ammunition on an attacking enemy, and that's a round that's loaded with the shot, and they can fire them horizontally into attacking forces. And that was one of our missions on several occasions.
So, what unit did you support?
Well, we supported the 2nd Division a lot. And we supported the Marines a lot.
Any foreign troops?
Well, we supported the Dutch and the Turks, and I can't remember where the hell that other bunch was from.
British?
No, we never did get involved with the British, but
Greece?
we had the Greeks, yeah, the Greeks, and the Dutch and the Turks.
Ethiopia?
Not that I know of, and we also supported ROC forces a time or two.
Yep. Were there any dangerous moments? I mean, artillery mostly worked in the rear area, but you said that you were in the front line too. So were there any dangerous moments that you could have been killed?
Oh, hell yes.
Tell me details, when and how it happened.
Well, my greatest risk was always at incoming mortar and artillery fire. And we got that several times. And in the Yangu area, we received a lot of artillery fire or mortar fire. And we had one instance where we were on a spearhead operation with the 5th Marines and a part of the 2nd Division, the 77th Tank Battalion, and that's who we were with. And we were running a spearhead called to NG, and they blocked the road on us at NG and surrounded us there. And for about a week, we were totally cut off, and we had enemy contact every day, and took a few casualties.
Mm-hmm.
But I lived through it.
How was life? Kind of, for example, where you sleep, what did you eat, things like that.
Well, we slept wherever we were when it got dark.
Not in the bunker.
Tried to. If we had bunkers, we'd sleep in the bunkers.
But what if you don't have bunker?
Then you sleep out on the ground.
With what? Sleeping bag?
Well, yeah, sleeping bags. Yeah, I always sleeping bag. And
Even in the winter?
yeah, in the winter we had sleeping bags too.
Must been damn cold.
It was plenty cold in there, and I spent that whole winter, 51, other than a short little hitch in a hospital. And
What happened? Were you wounded?
No, I didn't get wounded. I got involved in an accident between 2 trucks trying to move ammunition.
Yeah.
And I got my hand mashed and the end of a finger cut off, and they sent me to the hospital for a month. And but they made me stay there 3 extra months to make up for it.
How about food? What did you eat? C
We
ration?
had, a lot of times we had C rations and different class of C rations. You had the individuals, and then you had the large containers, and then we went to A rations. A lot of time we had good fresh A rations, depending on if we were in a stable position where we could have a mess unit up there to feed us. We had A rations.
What is A ration?
Well, A ration is they cook the food on site.
Okay.
That's basically what it is.
So C ration is in the bag, plastic bag.
C rations came in little boxes.
Yep.
One day's rations was a box about that long,
Uh-huh.
and it had a breakfast meal, a lunch meal, a dinner meal, and a supper meal. And it had a meat, food, fruit, horrible cookies and crackers, and some cigarettes, and they weren't that good. There was hamburgers or Franks and beans were pretty good. The pound cakes that came in them, I liked because they were good, and they were the closest thing to being fresh that we could get. These were C rations, mainly left over from World War II.
Yeah.
So they'd aged well. And you could take those and on our tracks, we had to cycle the engines periodically to make sure they were running all the time, because sometimes we would get a ASMO where you had just minutes to get out of get moving. That's called ASMO. Mm-hmm. All sections move out.
All sections move out.
Yeah. And when you started hearing rifle fire hitting the vehicles, you knew it was you better be ready to move. But we'd get the engines and put the C rations on the engines
So that it can be
to
hotter.
warm them up. Yeah, it worked good. Worked really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those hot days.
Oh well. It was one of the most interesting experiences of my life, of course, was going over there and seeing Korea as it was in 1951 and seeing the difficulty for the people, and then going back again in 71 and seeing a whole different world was very impressive to me.
1971, you went back to Korea.
I went back to Korea on a
revisit.
On a special forces mission.
Okay.
I went over there to create a decoy program for the North Koreans while they pulled down the 7th Division and redeployed I Corps, which is a combined corps of Korean American. And my mission was to accomplish decoy operations in North Korea and South Korea with communications and stuff to keep their attention while we brought the aircraft in from America and picked up the 7th Division and flew them back to California.
So, can you elaborate on that decoy program? What do you mean by decoy program? What is the specific example?
Well, a specific example would be we had a lot of radio traffic with scripted radio traffic to give them the indication that we were doing things. Mm-hmm. We also had false landings on the coast mm-hmm. from submarines, and we would move a 3-man team from a submarine onto the coast, and they'd go up the beach and into the brush, and they might drop maps or other equipment, and then we would backtrack them back to the coast, take them back and leave, but they would think that they would what they found, they would think they were still there. And then we had false discussions of putting agents across the DMZ, mm-hmm. as well as parachuting agents in. We didn't do it, but they thought we were doing it. And we would drop a dummy made of dry ice with a parachute harness and a parachute and flashlights and SOIs and different things, and it would drop, and when it hit the ground, open the harness, and the equipment would fall out, and the dry ice would disappear, would melt. And they would think that agents had dropped in. We'd drop them like 2 or 3 at a team, and they thought we were putting agents in, and most of North Korean military was busy hunting for those agents, and we were preparing the 7th Division to climb on the airplanes and go back. And I jumped in with the 7th Division, with the 82nd Airborne. They brought 1 battalion and dropped at Osan, but they brought all the aircraft that I think they had in the Air Force and landed them at Osan and a couple of other bases in Korea, but I was working out of Osan. Mm-hmm. And in 3 days, they took the entire division out of there and back to California. And
was it successful?
Oh, hell, it was.
What is the evidence?
The evidence was that North Korea had no idea what we were doing.
Right.
We were able to.
How do you know?
Pardon?
How did you know?
Well, we monitor their radios too, and we know what they're doing. But we were able to pull the 7th Division out, redeploy the 2nd Division to cover the areas they left, and the I Corps units, which were ROC and U.S. units. And when we got all done, they thought we were having a field exercise. That's what we sold them. And we had all kinds of communications and activity going on as if there was a division size FTX, field training exercise, going on in Korea. But there wasn't. It was called Freedom Vault.
So why were you involved in that? Your specialty was gunnery and driving at the time in the war, but what was your specific role in that?
Well, this was long after that. This was in the I think it was 71, and I was in Special Forces,
What kind of?
Green Berets.
Oh. So after the Korean War, you joined the Green Beret.
After the Korean War, and I got commissioned, I got eligible. I went into the Green Berets and stayed there the rest of my tour,
Uh-huh.
rest of my military time.
By the way, when did you leave Korea?
Pardon?
When did you leave Korea from the war?
I left Korea from the war in April of 1952.
And you were there in 1971, and any other time? Did you went back to
I only
Korea?
made those 2 trips there. I went through there a couple of times since going to China and places on business. But I was there for almost a year. As soon as Freedom Ball was over, they packed me up and sent me back. But I was a Special Forces singleton officer, and I pulled several special missions. And I had people working for me there from Okinawa for the first Special Forces, and people from 8th Army, and well, they weren't working for me at that time. They were working for. Originally, there was a colonel in charge of that program, and a lieutenant colonel as his executive officer.
Mm-hmm.
And before the exercise came about, the colonel had a heart attack and had to be hospitalized and then evacuated to the States, and the lieutenant colonel took over. I was a major then. And just before the exercise was to take place, this lieutenant colonel had an emergency evacuation from a death in his family, and they left him there. And they asked me if they thought I could take over till he got back, and I said I thought I could, and I did. And I had a 3-star general, but I can't think of his name. It was Rowney and one other. And when it came time for the lieutenant colonel to come back, he told him to stay there, that I was doing a good job and they didn't want to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran the program then through the entire exercise.
You mean the special decoy program?
Yes.
So since then, have you been back to Korea? Did you join any revisit program?
No.
No. So 1971 was the last time that you were in Korea.
Yes.
But you know now Korean economy and so on.
I know. Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. I've had some business with the Koreans.
What kind?
Equipment. And I had a corporate development, a corporate consulting firm, and we did mergers and acquisitions. And I've had Koreans come looking for technology, and we would find a small American company with unique technology that they wanted, and they would acquire it.
So, you didn't know much about Korea. You left Korea in 1952.
That's right.
And now you know about the Korean economy.
Oh, yes.
When you left Korea in 1952, did you ever imagine that Korea would become like this?
I did not.
Why not?
I don't know why not, but I thought they would always be Korea in 1952, because most of the villages had no buildings left over. They all had just huts left. There were a few buildings down around Busan. Daegu had a couple. Seoul had 3 or 4 buildings still, what you call buildings. But the one thing I will say, I knew then that the Korean people had a real strong work ethic and a motivation to do things, because I saw them carrying those damn 50-gallon drums on those A-frames, those backpacks that they carried, and I couldn't imagine people being that strong and being able to work like that.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, I had several Korean people that I met and worked with, and but I never thought, I wouldn't have imagined that they could have developed as they did. But I think they realized that America helped them a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm really proud of them to do that. I think the Nakdong River at the time over there had one usable bridge. When I was there in '72, there were 14 of them. That whole river where it goes through Seoul and
You mean
Incheon.
Han River, not
Oh, the Han River, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Han River, not the Nakdong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it was I had bridges all up the river, and I thought, my God. And as we flew in,
Gimpo.
people on the streets packed with people, the buildings, a lot of activity, everything going on, and we had quite a time. I had a little private compound there because everything we were doing was top secret, and the Slicky boys would come and cut my fence
Mm-hmm.
and come in pilfering. Do you understand what Slicky boys are?
Yeah. What is it? Tell to the audience, please.
Well, the Slicky boy were the Korean boys and young men they would grease themselves so you couldn't catch them. You try to catch, like trying to catch a greased hog or something, because
like an eel.
That's right, and if they got caught, they would run and get away. I had an old sergeant there working for me from Special Forces, and he patrolled the fence one night, and he found where they had cut our wire fence. We had a chicken wire fence around the whole thing, and they had cut the fence and tied a white cloth above the hole in the fence. Mm-hmm. And they could go on a run and hit that hole and get away. And he picked up that cloth and moved it down about 50 yards of fence, well, it wasn't that far, about 20 yards, and tied it.
Uh-huh.
And we had 2 or 3 Slicky boys that ran into the fence. And they never bothered us after that. They quit coming back. And in fact, they had to hospitalize 2 of them. But they would take anything. This was in the 70s. This was the second trip over there.
Oh, you were not talking about the war in 1950?
No, I'm not talking about during the war.
Oh, gee.
During the war, we would give them anything we had that they could use. And we all had kids, Korean children that came and they'd get little uniforms. They'd be part of our unit, and we'd feed them, and they'd clean your boots and clean your weapons, do everything they could for you. But we fed them and clothed them and kept them alive. They're orphans, that needed to live.
So there are something really good came out of the Korean War and your service, right?
Oh, I should say. I developed a very serious, sincere respect for the Korean people, because I worked with them on this decoy program a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and there were some things that of their philosophy that I didn't agree with, and I always felt that it was okay to steal stuff as long as you didn't get caught. The crime wasn't the stealing; it was getting caught. But they did a good job for me. I had some exposure to them in Vietnam, and I never did get any brawls with them because I was always out in doing other things with small units. But I know they fought pretty well in Vietnam, and they had these LSTs, and they kept hauling weapons from Vietnam back to Korea, and equipment that they could get a hold of, and they'd load it up and haul it back to Korea because they were short of equipment during the Vietnam War, but they did a good job. They did themselves proud when it came to fighting.
Yeah, it's just like Japanese took advantage of Korean War. After 35 years of colonial policy in Korea,
absolutely
extracting everything, taking everything away from Korean people. Right after that, there was a Korean War, and Japanese economy boomed up because of the special demands from the Korean War.
Yep.
And Koreans did the same thing during the Vietnam War.
They learned.
Yeah.
We've never learned in this country.
You've been doing all over,
Yep.
So, despite such a beautiful outcome out of your service, right? Korea was poorest country in the world. Now, Korea's economy is 11th largest economy, and we used to receive aid from other countries, including U.S. Now we are offering aid to other countries. Despite such beautiful outcome, why we don't talk about it? Why we don't teach much about it in the classroom? Why? And how we can overcome that?
The reason that you don't hear much about it is because the press is anti-administration, and the Korean government is pro-administration. The Korean government are much more conservative in their philosophy than the American Democrat government. But the Democrats control the media.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if they're in the office or the conservatives are in the office. The media is controlled by the Democrats, and they don't do anything that might directly or indirectly benefit the conservative administration.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to say that I went to Vietnam the first time in 1963, before the war, with a Special Forces A team, 12 men, and we jumped into a tribal area in South Vietnam and ran operations against the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that was a time where I was saying, comparing the Korean people to the Vietnamese people. The Korean people are much more motivated to work and to accomplish things. The Vietnamese people had a tendency to, I shouldn't say this probably, but they had a tendency to just accept it as it is, not worry about improving things.
Mm.
And the Chinese that I worked with, the Nungs, were very aggressive, and they were controlling most of the economy in South Vietnam. Were controlled by Chinese.
Yep.
And that's because of their ethics, the ethos that they carried with them from China into Vietnam when the Nungs left, the Nung tribe left China.
Mm-hmm. So that's why we are. My foundation is publishing lesson plan and curriculum books, and I want to work with the history teachers in Cody and this area. If you can connect them with me, so that I can give this book free, and I can invite the teachers to the conference free. My foundation support their airfare, hotel, meals, everything free. So I really am interested in working with the history teachers in the school here in Wyoming. And if you can, please let me know, okay?
I would be interested in doing whatever I could.
Sure.
You know, we had, we used to have a history teacher here in our high school that every year he brought in some of the veterans for 2 or 3 days, and we just talked to the students.
Tell America program. Right? Yeah.
Basically, but not they don't have that now.
Mm-hmm.
The last leadership of our school that was here were very anti-military, anti-war, anti-American, as far as I was concerned. But they've got a new regime there, and I think they'd be very receptive to it.
But you know what? This Korean War is not just about the war. It's about that something came out of the war,
Oh,
and
without
it is all about very important in world history.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
if you know of any school connection, you let me talk to them, and I think they will accept us. Okay? So,
Sure.
Yeah. Now, you were involved in the construction of the Korean War Veterans Memorial here in Cody, right?
Very much.
Yeah, so tell me about it.
Well, it was the guy that came up with the idea was Paul Rodriguez.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked to me, and I told him I would help all I could.
Yep.
We organized, and there were about a half a dozen of us who worked on it. I raised all the money for it,
Mm-hmm.
almost all the money. And we contacted the Korean government, contacted the Korean embassy in Denver, and some Koreans in Cheyenne, and we got a lot of support. Korean government gave us some money for the memorial. I got our governor to give us money. I got some money from the federal government. I got some donors that I knew that I'd worked when I was in corporate businesses. I got a hold of a bunch of corporate VIPs and raised $350,000.
That's a lot.
Yeah, well, I ended up raising $2 million before we got done out there.
Wow.
And because I stayed there and did all the rest of the memorials. I did the World War II memorial. Did the whole building of the park, the landscaping and building of the park,
Mm-hmm.
and the World War I memorial and the other memorials out there. I raised all the money for that. Raised all the money for the engineering. That used to be a canal in a little valley through there that ran over and dumped. You'd think it was going to the lake, but then it goes behind the motel and into the canal. And it was down pretty deep. And we filled that completely, put that canal in tile, and started out with a little idea of a Korean memorial, and it grew into a pretty good sized one and pretty significant one.
Very nice.
Have you been out there to see it?
No, I'm going to go see it.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
And I did all the landscaping and planning for the park. Did all electrical. I didn't do it, but I got it done. I had one man helping me who worked with my engineers. And it took 8 years to go from when we started till we got finished. And the state has adopted it as the State of Wyoming Memorial Park.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a memorial to all of the veterans who died in military service.
Yep.
It's not just for all veterans, but the name of every veteran from Wyoming who died in military service is individually recognized in the park.
Okay. Bob, this is 70th anniversary of the Korean War breakout. And you know, right? 70th.
Yeah, I do know that.
Do you have any special message to the Korean people about the 70th anniversary?
I probably would have if I could just take a minute to think. But
Yeah.
I would say that they should be very proud of what they've done for their country, and that most of the American people who know are proud of them for what their country has done. And I've had occasion to have Korean people to come up and shake my hand and thank me for, they see my hat with Korea on it, and I'd made one trip to Korea during the war and 3 trips to Vietnam during the war. So I had a little more Vietnam exposure, and I was also an officer then, and I got to be a lieutenant colonel. Held every rank from private up through the ranks to lieutenant colonel.
That's an amazing transformation too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was quite a time.
And Korea is a big part of it.
Korea is part of it, you bet. You bet. I grew up in Korea. I became a man in Korea. I had the life experiences that you have to become a man instead of a boy. Whether it be war and death and killing and women, and Korea made a man of me, literally.
Yep. Bob, this has been a very wonderful conversation.
I hope so.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you did tell me most of the things. And on behalf of Korean nation, I want to thank you for your fight and honorable service, and especially things that you have done even after the Korean War and the Special Forces program in 1971, when 7th Division was withdrawing from the Korean Peninsula, replaced by the 2nd Division, and there was a decoy program, and I think they are still using it.
They weren't being replaced. At that time, the 2nd and the 7th were both there.
Okay.
And they drew down the 7th and then redeployed the 2nd.
Got it.
To cover their area as well as the 2nd's area.
Yes, that's what I meant. You know? So that was a very special, and I think you have contributed to Korea what it is right now. So in many different ways.
I do.
And Koreans never forget. And this interview will be used for the classroom, okay? Thank you so much again.
You're very welcome. Glad to do what I could.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.